Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Spinner, and if you didn't listen to the last episode, I am changing my name on the show to go with my married name. So that might take a little bit of getting used to, but it is still me, your regular host. And I am going to be talking with Kathleen Rodgers this week, who grew up in New Mexico, now is in Texas, has a new book out with UNM Press called The Llano County Mermaid Club. Kathleen, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for having me on the show. And thank you for reading my novel. I grew up in Clovis, New Mexico, and always kind of had a little chip on my shoulder. But we got to go to Albuquerque every few months to go visit an aunt and uncle. And I was always like, oh, that's the real New Mexico. It always stayed with me. Sometimes growing up in eastern New Mexico, the joke was, well, y'all are really more Texan. We're not Texan. We're in New Mexico. But I've been writing. I'm 67. I declared myself a writer in high school. Did I really understand what that meant? No. But I gave myself a goal and kind of a title, and then I had to figure out how to earn it.
I think that's a question a lot of writers face. I don't think there's really a concrete answer to that. So I think everybody
I agree.
kind of gets to define it how they want.
Yes, exactly.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Llano County Mermaid Club.
If I were, the old elevator pitch tells a story of childhood friendships, an adult affair, and the lost innocence of a group of young girls growing up in the desert Southwest and longing for the sea. Main characters. There's one narrator named Marigold Hubbard. She has two sisters, Clover and Tansy Hubbard. And then the three Hubbard sisters have their mother, and her name is Letty. Letty has a key role in the novel. And to understand that, well, I invite people to read it. But I call it a dual timeline. Some of the chapters take place in the 60s and 70s, and then the present day all take place in 2017, usually in the fictional town of Sand Hill, New Mexico. And yes, for those who know, Llano County in New Mexico is a fictional county, not to be confused with Llano County in Texas.
Well, and I did want to ask you, as far as the dual timelines, how did you pick when you were going to set the two timelines?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard to explain. I've had people ask me that before, and here's how I think. I don't think linear. I kind of think in everything I do in life, kind of circular. I talk in circles, which drives like my husband crazy, my sons, but it's just how I think. And so when I'm in a story, when I'm writing a story, even when I try to write a straight linear story, it doesn't come that way. Story and scenes, characters, they come to me like memories. And as we know, you can be 50 years old, and in just the snap of your finger, you can remember what you were doing when you were 5 years old. And that's how I kind of describe the process of writing this novel, and most of my novels that I've written, is there's never one particular date. If one scene is in, say, the summer of 1968, the next chapter may be back in 2017, and those characters are decades older. And why does that matter? And how I like to explore how the past and the present still can affect each other and even into the future. And what are the connections and what are the links that connect the different eras and the people and things that happen?
And I think this book does a really good job of that because you get bits and pieces and you get hints here and there of things that you're not going to learn about until later, but which for the characters have already happened and has influenced them. So in some
Yes.
cases, you're seeing the results and the effects of something that they've been through before you really know what it is. But I thought it was interesting reading because even not always knowing what caused those impacts on the character, it still
Hmm.
felt very familiar. Like you can think at yourself and things that you've experienced. And it was like, not that I could say like, oh yeah, it's this exact thing, but I could connect with, I know what that feels like in that moment. And it kind of led me toward, we might be dealing with
Hmm.
something along this lines. And so it was kind of these little mysteries woven into the bigger story of recognizing some aspect of what they're feeling and how this has a lot of the times hurt them and changed them, but not knowing exactly what it was, but still kind of having it in the back of your mind. And then when you find out later and things getting pieced together. So it was a lot of fun to have this, not even like dual point of view because, or dual timelines,
Mhm.
because it bounces
Right.
around
It
within
does
within
bounce
that
around.
time.
Yes.
But it,
Yes.
it made it really interesting to see the development of the characters broken up in these different little sections and then kind of putting the pieces together as you're reading it. I enjoyed that structure. I thought it brought a really unique aspect to watching how the characters developed throughout the story.
Thank you so much. And it also helps me as I'm writing a story. If it goes back and forth in time, let's say when one chapter ends and the next chapter begins, if there's a huge jump in time, I'm always seeing how I orient the reader. So if the reader's finishing a scene, say in 1972, and the next chapter takes place in 2017, it's how I set it up. But I love chapter headers. You know, a lot of older novels, they all had chapter headers. There are a lot of chapter books for young adult and kids did back in the day, but I try to let the reader know immediately, wait, we're not back in, say, 1968 or 72. We're back in the present, 2017. Why does all this matter? It's a lot of work, but that's how the story came to me again, like memories. And sometimes after I've written a book, I think about those books and well, every book becomes a memory. Everything we do in life, the second we've experienced it, it's a memory. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does. Well, and I noticed too that aside from just having the captions, that within your first couple of sentences of each new
Hmm.
chapter, there
Yes.
are clues there of what time period we're in, even if like you don't notice the exact year right away, like you know if we're in the present or if we're somewhere in the past. And
Right.
I think that can be challenging to do, particularly like I've noticed this with writers who are doing even like dual point of view, and maybe they're
Yes.
still working on developing the characters' voices. And so
Yes.
it might sound a little bit similar. And so you've got to give those clues right off the bat to tell the reader, like, whose point of view we're in, what time period we're in, where we're at, different things like that. And
Yes.
there's really an art to that. It takes some time to be able to do that well without just stating it in the first sentence. In 2017 at Clover's shop, we did this.
Right.
Because
Well,
that
that's
gets a little
so
boring.
true. Yes, because you have to figure out that that's the part of the writing or the magic or the mystique, the mystery of how to make it interesting. And you know, because you're a writer, you're a novelist. If I'm bored, the reader's going to be bored. If I'm not excited about the scene I'm working on, the reader's not going to be excited. So it's always that reminding myself that, wait, I'm not just the writer here and the storyteller. I also, in some ways, I'm the reader experiencing it as the storyteller deep inside of me is telling the story. I hope that makes sense. It's a process. And sometimes when I think about it, because I've started a sixth novel and I kind of put it aside for a little bit because I felt like I needed to take a breather. Not to sound like a downer, but writing a novel, at least for me, it's exhausting. It can be exhilarating, but exhausting. You know, one minute you're like, oh my God, I love what I'm writing. The next minute I'm like, I'm exhausted from writing. It's not like you've ran a marathon, but your brain has.
Yeah, it does take a lot of mental and emotional energy that you're
Yes.
putting into that and the work of developing. It
Yes.
does. It takes a lot out of you, and it's really solitary in that way. Like, you can, if you have like a good critique partner or a friend who will listen to you talk endlessly about whatever you're doing, then that
Right.
helps. But a lot of the time, we're working on it
I'll run
just
them
in
off.
our heads. Yeah,
Right.
it does. It takes a lot. It's something that your process is so unique as a writer. Like you develop that over time. And sometimes that's
Hmm.
really hard to like explain to someone else and work them into your process if someone's there as kind of an outlet or to
Yes.
prompt you or anything like that. Like it can be a challenge to bring someone into everything that's in your head and then discuss it
Yes.
in a helpful way. Kind of related back to what you were discussing, I wanted to ask you about your character development process because when I write, like I have to write linearly. I might jump around as far as like what's going on in the story, but like I have a starting point and I need to write chapter by chapter or I get lost and I
Hmm.
miss things and all of that. So trying to put myself in your place of developing
Hmm.
these different timelines and thinking ahead to what the character is like in the future, but then bringing it back. How do you keep all of that straight as you're developing multiple characters who have a lot of depth to them in the story? That's a lot to keep track of.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. It is. And that's why I say it's exhausting. I have to live in the story to get into character, if you will. Even though I'm not an actor, but in a way, we writers, in a way, we're all of that. I have to feel my way into a story. I have to feel my way into each character. I have to imagine everything that character feels, even if it doesn't make it on the page. To me, has to start with that spark, that emotion. If there's not an emotional charge in some way with the character, that idea that gets me deep inside and makes me want to do this to myself. And why does this story matter? And who will it matter to? Why do these characters, why are they trying to come through me? Who are you? I will say to them, tell me your story. What is it you're trying to tell me? And some people might think that's voodoo or sound weird, but I think most writers of fiction get that. I really have to tap into emotion and try to always think I have to write with emotional impact. If there's no emotion in anything or no tension, even if there's not anything bad happening, say in a scene, but if there's not some kind of conflict or tension, it's just going to be flat. And that's what I'm always aiming for, is even those little undercurrents that you may not even, most people might not tap into in a room, but there's always going to be some kind of tension going on. And that's what I try to tap into. And with each character, I try to think, okay, if I'm writing in the narrator's voice, in this case, Marigold Hubbard is the narrator. She's the middle Hubbard sister. But if she's telling the story and she's talking about her best friend Melody, or her two sisters Clover and Tansy and their friend Ruthie, or she's talking about Mama, who is Letty Hubbard, or the dad, Dorian, got to come from that deep, deep place.
Well, and the depth of your characters is something that stands out in your writing. I noticed on your website you said that your fiction has an emphasis on those dynamics between family members, friendships, in society, all of those different ways that we connect with people. They're
Yes,
rarely simple, easy, problem free connections. There's always
right.
stuff you have to navigate. And then sometimes, there's a lot of stuff to navigate, especially with family, I think, because
Yes,
you get to choose your friends and the people that you associate with, but you don't really get to choose your family. You're kind of stuck dealing with whatever that brings to the situation, especially as a kid when you have very little control over everything going on around you. And you
yes,
get into that in this book a lot, where you have characters who have qualities that make them likable, but they also bring a lot of problems to the situation, and the other people have to deal with that. And that's something that I think is very hard to balance when you're dealing with deeply flawed characters, of trying to keep them relatable and sympathetic, at least on some
yes,
level, but also being very honest about their bad decisions and the way they hurt people and
yes.
how other people deal with that and put up with it. And it's a very complex web of connections and emotions. And how do you approach dealing with all of that?
Thank you so much. I think it's just like real life, real relationships. And this one word I'll say has been getting a bad rap with certain groups of people these days, but it all comes down to empathy. And for me, the writer, and we've all heard about, how do you gain reader empathy? For me, it has to start between me, the writer, and these characters. And even when, say, in this story, Dorian Hubbard, the dad, the little girls, and oh, he's daddy and he's handsome and he does some heroic, but then sometimes daddy can be a rascal. And I had my late dog that I lost in February. I called him my lovable rascal. Oh my gosh, he was always getting into trouble and doing things that irritated me. But you know what? We still loved him. He was a member of the family. And I think every person who has family, every family's different, but there's always one person that's going to annoy the heck out of somebody else. And yet, if you can see past that to the humanity between people, the commonality, the common ground, that's what I'm always looking for in the characters, even when they've been wronged or hurt or so emotionally stung. I mean, we've all been there when you're so hurt that it's a physical sting. It hurts. I'm always trying to tap into that. And then I'm always, just like in real life, I'm always looking for hope. I used to joke that hope was my middle name. It's not, but without hope, that's how I approach my stories. Is I always am looking for hope, even in some really hard times.
I love that focus, and especially right now, because I think, gosh, you open a news app or something, and it's just really
Yes,
awful, dreadful things like every time you look at it, and it's very
yes,
easy to get in that mindset of everything's terrible, everybody is terrible, and to
yes.
just kind of lose faith in humanity in a lot of ways. I think, like, I've struggled with that lately of just being like, oh my gosh, like, everything is just getting
I
worse and
know.
worse, and there's nothing to do about it. But there are still these wonderful moments, and even in people that you struggle with, there are still
Yes.
good qualities. And sometimes it's hard to find them. They
And it's
are
so
almost always
true.
there.
And you just have to, I think, as a writer and just me as a person, as a human being, just always looking for glimmers of hope or that one little spark. We've all met someone who, even a stranger, you try to, if you've got jury duty and you go and there's all these big, huge room full of strangers, I always at least try to connect with one person so I don't feel so alone in the world for that time. And I think with when I'm writing or the characters, I hate to say when I'm writing my characters, because to me, once I've figured out who they are and they've told me who they are, they feel like real people to me. When I think about all the characters in the Llano County Mermaid Club, it's a strange thing because I'm not living in this story every day because I'm not writing it anymore. It's out there. And by the way, I got to give a shout out to University of New Mexico Press. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to my awesome agent, Tracy Crow, for pitching to UNM Press and brought my story to life. But sometimes it's almost like all of the characters in that story, it's like a memory, or it's like it's that place. I haven't been to Sandhill in a while. I haven't talked to the characters in a while. It's been a while because I'm not living in that story every moment. Right before you called, I kind of panicked for a minute, like, oh my God, should I go try to do a quick, scan through the book real quick? Is there anything I've forgotten? And yet I lived in the story. I dreamed the story, would wake up in the middle of the night solving problems for my characters back when I was writing it.
It really does become a part of you. And it's
Yes.
hard to leave it behind when it's, finished and you miss those
Yes.
characters. It's an interesting experience. And I wonder if other art forms feel something similar, like when they paint or create music or things like that, if it's you finish it and then like, oh, well, now I have to like give this to other people.
Right.
It's just kind of a weird experience. And I'm
It
curious.
really is. And it's such a good feeling to know this is no longer my book. I felt that way too once you and Impress said yes. I'm like, oh, thank goodness. My characters have a good home, a good literary home with you and Impress. I felt that way when Tracy Crow first said yes to the book. I felt like, okay, for now, they're here temporarily living with her, and then she will find a good publisher. I do long sometimes. I wish I could be back in that moment of when I was writing certain scenes and the feelings that I was feeling. And if I know how to fix that, is to sit down and finish novel 6 that I started and kind of put aside for a little bit. But writing, and also writing, if people say, oh, well, don't you just love to write? Well, I used to be afraid how to answer, but I'm not afraid anymore at 67 years old. And I've been doing this for so long. It's not that I love to write nowadays because it's work. But when I'm not writing, I'm thinking about writing. And all writers know this if they've done any kind of writing. There's always, oh, I should be writing. Or, the guilt of I better be writing. Or if you're reading a really good novel that someone else wrote, you're like, I wish I would have written this. It's just a crazy way to live. And yet it's what I know. And I can't imagine not living in my imagination a lot. I can't imagine going through life without constantly thinking about story, that everything's stories.
Well, as humans, we need stories, whether we're the ones telling them or if we're consuming them, if we're sharing them. That's so much a part
Yes,
of what it means to be human that, yeah, it can be very consuming when you're the one doing the creating because
yes,
it takes so much of yourself, and the act of sharing it is also its own odd kind of work. it's a very
yes.
it's a very interesting process. And I did want to ask you, because we're already starting to get short on time, but I wanted to ask you one more
Okay,
thing before we wrap up.
okay.
It's something that kind of came up on some podcast I was listening to. I can't even remember, but they were talking about writing from personal experience, like even if it's not memoir, if it's just, kind of taking those bits and pieces of a town similar to where you grew up, or,
Yes, yes,
people and you're not writing people, but, you pick up little characteristics and things like that. And
right, right.
sometimes that also involves different traumas and hard emotions that you've experienced. And
Yes,
when you're writing from something that's kind of close to your heart, it can not only, it takes a lot out of you, but it can also be hard to tell when you're moving from like writing as a therapeutic endeavor to like work through and explore whatever it is that drew you to that topic, and when you've
yes,
kind of moved past that point to be able to like really turn it into a story outside of you and polish
yes,
it and then have it ready for readers. Do you have any
yes.
thoughts or advice on that for maybe someone who's attempting to do that? And, just kind of what was that like for you?
Oh gosh, oh my God, like you're describing like my whole career. Even before I ever had a novel published, I sold several first person stories to Family Circle magazine. Back in the day, that was, I had millions of readers that would read a very personal story. For instance, in 1994, I had an article come out in Family Circle magazine called Dying to Be Thin. And that was about my 15-year struggle with the eating disorder bulimia and how I overcame it, if you will. I think for me, writer, it's not that it gets easier with time, but when you've been through something traumatic or you've been very close to trauma and you've been this side of trauma, that side in the middle, and then when you try to get it down in a story form, what I do is I give it, how do I say this? I always say, I'm going to give that to my character. I'm going to give this to this character. If there's an issue, a struggle, a problem, that's what I do. I give that to my character or my characters. And in some ways, it's where, okay, I lived through this horrible thing or this event, and now I can take all that emotion and pull it from me. I'm like, right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm like, my hands are like pulling from my chest, my heart, and I'm putting it out at arm's length, and then I'm releasing it. And when I say I'm releasing it, what that means in the process of writing is it's no longer just internal inside of me. I'm trying to put it out there into a story and then make it where I hate to say entertaining, but where the reader wants to turn the page. What happened next? Is there hope here? Is there darkness? Is there joy? Is there a chance for happiness? There was a time, it's very scary, but that's part of the beauty of trusting the process. And the more we write and as we experience life, you get, how do you say, the courage to write. I've got probably more courage now than I ever did 20 and 30 years ago. And then sometimes I worry, like, oh, am I getting a little bit too much courage? Because am I going to dabble into this topic? And that's a tender thing with certain people that I know. I think it all comes down to having the courage to really write what really wants to come out deep inside. And then it's not just like splat, it's on the page, but then trying to form it, shape it. I call it like writing a book to me is like making a meatloaf. You throw in all this yucky, mushy ingredients, and then you have to shape it into a loaf and then bake it. So it's process.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's something that writing is very personal. It's very therapeutic at times, but it's not a one and done kind of experience where you're like, okay, I got that out, it's done, someone else can have it now. It's like,
Yes. Well,
there's so much more.
unfortunately, there is some of that out there. Just because someone has a keyboard doesn't mean that. I think there's a lot of things out on the marketplace now that either weren't edited or didn't sit long enough. That's a whole nother issue. The marketplace flooded with either books that weren't edited enough, the author didn't sit with it long enough. They just wanted it done and out there. And I'm always like, well, wait a minute, readers going to pay hard-earned money for this book. I hope it can be the quality that they're expecting to get.
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes for some writers it's hard to tell when something's done, and
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be that, community of readers and support to help guide that
Yes,
with newer writers at times. And hopefully
right.
editors and all of that are thorough and taking the time. I think sometimes there's issues with that side of it as
Yeah,
well.
it can be hard, right? I guess what I'm, is having our work vetted, whatever, just those layers of, and I'm not really talking gatekeeper. Oh, we've all been there with that, but just people who can help us in say a critique group, beta readers, people we trust, but they're not going to automatically say, oh, I love this. I love everything you do. That can not be helpful at times.
Very true. And it can be hard to find that honest partner who will give you like useful, helpful feedback. But I think that's so important in the writing process to learn how to share and then work through whatever feedback you get and kind of just learn that process of revision and working toward that quality finished product. 'Cause I think it's really easy to just be like, okay, I'm tired of working on this. Let's just throw it out there and see what happens.
Right,
Um,
right.
it's an interesting industry, and well, yeah, I'm not a fan of gatekeeping. I am a fan of taking the time to put out quality products. So I appreciate your
Yes.
advice on that. I think that's wonderful. And there's so much more to this book. There's a lot of wonderful themes, really great characters. We are out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there and invite people to
Okay.
pick up a copy of the book. Where can people find you, Kathleen Rodgers, and the book, The Llano County Mermaid Club, online? And how can
Oh,
people reach out if they'd like to?
look me up. It's Kathleen M. Rodgers, Rodgers, the Llano County Mermaid Club. I'm happy to hear from readers.
I'll put a link to your website in the show notes. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for taking the time to come on the show. I really enjoyed the book and I enjoyed our chat today.
Thank you so much, DelSheree, and good luck to you on your own writing.